Good morning, everyone. My name is Alberto Neidhardt, and I'm the head of the migration program here at the EPC. And on behalf of the European Policy Center and of the Egmont Institute, I would like to give you a warm welcome to this hybrid conference dedicated to responsibility and solidarity under the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. As we all know, the title of today's conference goes to the heart of one of the fundamental reasons for the dysfunctionalities of the current common European asylum system, and the lack of balance between responsibility and solidarity has contributed to undermining trust between member states, also making a comprehensive reform of the rules look like a political and legal utopia for a long time. So when back in December of last year, we learned, like all of you, that the European Parliament and Council had managed to reach a political agreement on the reforms, we thought that it became an imperative to bring together policymakers, civil society organizations and experts to explore whether the new system will be able to strike a better balance compared to the current one. Now, before presenting you the goals and the program of today's event, I would like to ask my colleagues to kindly play a video recording from the Commissioner for Migration and Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, who, due to a conflict in her agenda, couldn't be here in person, but nevertheless wished to make her voice heard ahead of our discussion.
Hi, everybody. In September 2020, I presented the Pact on Migration and Asylum. And 2 days before the launch, I gave the European Policy Center a little preview in a special webinar dedicated to the Pact. You were one of the first to know what's in it. And so it's a pleasure, 3.5 years later, to tell you about the result. When I took office as Commissioner, I knew that the road would not be easy. There was little trust among member states, a harsh atmosphere. The situation was stuck, polarized. Member states were thinking in terms of winning and losing. If that member state wins, that means I must lose. And so even before I presented the Pact, it was my mission to rebuild trust. From day one, I traveled to meet ministers to build trust. And now member states realize that migration is not a zero-sum game. Realize that with an agreement, we are all winners. And without an agreement, we are all losers. I put forward balanced proposals. No one was passionate about them, but no one rejected them either. So we had a good foundation, allowing us to start building compromises. And last December, Parliament and Council concluded a historic agreement on the Pact, a real game changer. The Pact will give us a solid legal foundation for managing migration in a comprehensive and integrated way to better protect the EU external borders and better protect people. Introducing screening to channel people into the right procedure, a new border procedure for people who probably won't need international protection, allowing fast-track examination of asylum claims and quick returns for those who receive negative decisions. Strong legal safeguards will apply, including rules to ensure adequate capacity to prevent overcrowding, to prevent new morias. For the very first time, we will have mandatory solidarity, supporting member states in need. No member state will be left alone. Everyone will contribute with equal value contributions. And member states will be able to choose how to show solidarity. Relocation, financial contributions, or, for example, in-kind support. The Pact will also include effective rules to detect and prevent secondary movements and to prevent abuse of the system. The Pact creates new safeguards for asylum seekers and vulnerable people, especially minors and families with children. Free legal counseling for all applicants in all asylum procedures. swift appointment of representatives for unaccompanied minors, new rules for family tracing and to prevent children going missing. And we are setting a new EU standard for reception, with earlier access to the labour market and better access to education, and with new monitoring mechanisms for complying with fundamental rights. We will also have a specific legal framework to manage crises, including situations characterized by instrumentalization, instead of relying on ad hoc national solutions. The successful delivery of the Pact will require commitment from all, and technical, operational and financial support. So I'm very happy that the European Council agreed to an additional €2 billion, mainly to support implementation of the Pact. My priority now is implementation, implementation, implementation. In the same way we built the Pact, by taking responsibility together, Commission and Member States, I want the common implementation plan to be adopted well ahead of schedule. The Pact depends on a well-functioning Eurodac, which will be a key stepping stone. We will help to overcome operational and technical obstacles. But of course, the Pact alone will not solve all our challenges. We need to fight the smugglers, building on the global alliance and anti-smuggling proposals I launched last year. We need to work with partners along migration routes. And we need to improve legal pathways to Europe for labour migrants and for refugees, for instance by using the resettlement framework that's part of the Pact. This is a historic moment. With the Pact, we show Europe and the world that we can move forward on migration together, an issue that's important to millions of Europeans. And the Pact will also make us stronger worldwide. Often when we speak with third countries on migration, they say, well, first you need to put your own house in order. Now we are putting our own house in order. So now I will do what I can to make the Pact not only a legal reality, but also a reality on the ground. Europe is watching. The world is watching.
The expectations and the stakes, I would say, are really high, as reflected in the words of the Commissioner, and so much depends on how the rules will operate together and on the ground, against also the overall objective of achieving a better balance between solidarity and responsibilities. And many are the questions in this context that come to mind. Will the mandatory flexible solidarity mechanism mentioned by the Commissioner, for example, provide an effective tool to balance out the expanded use of border procedures? And as we heard from the Commissioner, the mantra is now implementation. So will the preparation of the common implementation plan and then national plans to follow in the second half of the year offer an opportunity to mobilize all the necessary resources and political will in order to pave the way for a better balance between solidarity and responsibility? And also looking ahead, how will the balance between solidarity and responsibility play out in crisis situations? As mentioned, we also have a new regulation on this. Last but not least, how can the system be made more effective but also more fair and humane? How can the fundamental rights of asylum seekers be safeguarded, considering the new obligations of member states, for example, those at the EU's external borders? These are the key questions that will accompany us for the months to come, and I'm confident that this event will help us to better understand, and I also hope to better prepare for what lies ahead. So let me say a few words on the program of today's event. We have 2 panel discussions, each of 1 hour, as you must have seen from our program. And the first panel, which will be moderated by Jean-Louis de Brouwer, who I suspect you all know is the director of the European Affairs Program at Egmont, will zoom in the responsibility elements of the reforms, focusing in particular on new obligations connected to screening and border procedures, among other relevant changes. The second panel, which will be moderated by our own Helena Hahn, who's policy analyst here at the European Policy Center, will then move on to assess the solidarity elements of the new rules, with an eye in particular to the solidarity mechanism and the Asylum and Migration Management Regulation, which we know will replace the infamous Dublin III rules. There will be a coffee and an opportunity to network and stretch your legs. In between the two panels, you'll also get the chance of having a little bit more coffee. Now, without further ado, I will pass on the floor to Jean-Louis, who will also have the opportunity to introduce our first speakers, whom I already want to thank anyways for having accepted our invitation. Jean-Louis, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto. Good morning, everybody. Indeed, I mean, time will be of the essence this morning. We have a very tight schedule and a lot of questions to dig into. I will now, well, I don't actually need to introduce the other speakers part of this panel. I think that they are all well known to you. Of course, we have a division between responsibility and solidarity, but we all know that these are the two sides of the same coin, and that therefore I assume that there will be connection between what will be said during that panel and that what will follow up in the second panel. Each of these discussions will be introduced by a distinguished representative of the Odysseus network. I mean, Lilian, Tsourdi in this panel and Philippe de Bruycker in the next one, because of course, mostly EPC has been working intensively and is working intensively with the Odysseus network in the preparation of this workshop and also in the follow-up of the implementation of the Pact. So I will therefore turn to you, Lilian, first, and ask you maybe an academic overview about what is achieved by these, I mean, indeed, well-expected, impatiently expected agreement on the Pact with regards to responsibility and responsibility sharing. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Louis, and thank you to the organizers also for our cooperation. The ambition to establish a seamless migration process with prominent elements being screening, asylum, and return components will impact the balance between solidarity and responsibility in the new system. Creating a seamless migration process is not inherently negative. This approach acknowledges the intricate links between different policies at the operational levels, especially at border areas. The UNHCR had voiced the need for swift identification at the external borders, differentiation between categories of persons making up mixed flows, and referral to an appropriate procedure as early as 2007 through its so-called 10-point plan. The challenge in the new Pact instruments arises by the fact that an initial screening either can be coupled or in some cases should be coupled with border asylum processing and border return procedures that establish curtailed procedural guarantees in several aspects. Moreover, further elements of the implementation design generate tension between efficiency considerations and the quality of processing. In terms of the balance between responsibility and solidarity, more specifically, the operationalization of a seamless migration process has the potential to generate enhanced responsibilities, which is the main focus of this first panel. First, on screening. Member states, often with the support of EU agencies, operationalize variants of screening processes also currently, especially in border areas. The new procedure is, however, systematic. It has an ambitious deadline of a maximum 7 days when it is carried out at the borders. It will end up with a drafting of a screening form that has more clearly set out connections with the other stages, example, the asylum processing. Second, on the border procedures. Following the screening, applying border asylum procedures is an option that is left open to the member states, but which becomes mandatory for some categories of asylum seekers. The instruments introduce the notion of adequate capacity. This signals the capacity required at any given moment to carry out the asylum border procedure and the return border procedures. The instruments define the adequate capacity both at EU and national levels through a formula based on objective indicators. When the adequate capacity of a member state is reached, it no longer applies border procedures in the instances where they are not envisaged as mandatory. This measure operates on an inflow-outflow basis, So when capacity is made available again, the member states need to resume examination. In addition, the member states must continue examining mandatory cases of border procedures until they have reached the maximum number of applicants they are envisaged to examine per year. When even the latter number is reached, the member state only needs to apply border procedures in cases relating to endangerment of national security. So ascertaining levels of responsibility through objective indicators marks a positive improvement to the current situation where this is a matter of contestable self-identification. This mode of functioning has the potential to enhance levels of interstate mutual trust. Nevertheless, the identified indicators point to wider responsibilities for border member states. The mechanism's functioning also carries the potential to lead to inadequate procedural guarantees that fall short of fundamental rights standards, as member states may find themselves under political pressure to speed up processing time to release capacities that are ascertained on an inflow-outflow basis. The experience of the current processing at the border illustrates that the envisaged time limits are ambitious. In addition, the manner through which the numerical annual maximum is calculated generates increased enhanced responsibilities. This brings me to some final words on funding. The new Pact instruments pay greater attention to the financing of implementation. The instruments refer both to the national program and the thematic facilities of the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, AMIF, and the Border Management and Visa Instrument, so-called BMVI, for their operationalization, including two available amounts following the midterm review. The new border components are specifically referred to in this context. Once the solidarity pool under the Asylum and Migration Management Regulation begins to operate, it will make available further amounts. The solidarity pool consists also of financial contributions, meaning financial transfers to the EU budget as external assigned revenues to benefit member states that have access to the solidarity pool in a given year. There are a number of open questions on the solidarity potential of the funding landscape as it will be boosted. First, are the currently available financial means under the EU funds, also as boosted through the midterm review, sufficient for member states to build up their adequate capacity at the start of application as envisaged by the Pact instruments, or will these new obligations need to be heavily financed through national budgets? Once these processes begin to be operational, will the financing under the solidarity pool suffice to boost the existing limited amounts under the current multi-annual financial framework? Ultimately, will these new obligations heavily redirect EU funding towards the new procedural obligations at the borders and relatedly, quote unquote, downgrading other aspects of the national asylum and return systems? I stop here, and I'm certain we will come back to these elements during today's dialogue.
Thank you very much, Lilian, first of all, for having strictly stuck to the time limit that was assigned to you, and also for having illustrated what I said in my introduction, that there will be obvious spillover between the two sessions, but because you touch also on a series of key questions related to actually solidarity. I will now turn to our next speaker, Grigoris Delavekouras. I'm sorry, Gregory. We heard from the commissioner that there were neither losers nor winners at the end of the negotiation. But it's true, we've heard also from Lilian that, well, obviously, there will be wider responsibilities on border member states or frontline member states. As head of the Justice and Home Affairs team of the Greek permanent representation, you have been closely following that negotiation. You've been playing a role in the negotiation also. So we really would like to hear your assessment as representative of a frontline member state of the balance that was reached, and also maybe already hint at the main challenges for a frontline member state like Greece that will flow from the implementation of this agreement. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Henri. And I would like to start by saying that we had a fight with HP about who would actually sit in this panel. Maybe HP should be sitting here to talk about responsibility, and I should speak about solidarity. But then we decided that we will split them and cross over from one to the other. So let me start by saying that we believe the agreement on the pact is a major achievement. And it is a major achievement, not just because we needed a migration management system in the European Union. We urgently needed that, and we had been debating about it for many years, but also because we needed to send a political message that despite our differences and despite our different approaches, we are able to reach compromise in order to agree even on the most sensitive files. And of course, migration, we all know, is a very sensitive file for all our constituencies in all our countries. And it will not come as a surprise to you, but we believe that this agreement, we managed to reach it thanks to the goodwill and compromise spirit that was expressed by the Med5 member states. Being a Greek, I can proudly say that we believe that. But like any compromise, it does have its shortcomings. And of course, functionality will be the biggest challenge. Lilian described very eloquently why the frontline member states and the Med5 in particular carry the biggest burden and will continue to carry the biggest burden. It's a matter of geography and it will not change. For the first time, we have such a complex and detailed system that has provisions for every single step of the process. It was our choice, and this creates new responsibilities, new obligations for member states. We managed to reach a balance. It is the balance that was achievable at the time. And now the question is how we make it work. I will not go into the details now, but I will just focus on four main elements that I believe are going to make or break the implementation of the plan, of the pact. The first one is that we need to control the number of arrivals. The pact is an internal management system. No matter how well it operates, if we cannot control the number of arrivals, it will be impossible to have it work. This has been proven time and again. This is not up to us. This depends on the external dimension of the migration policy. I will just mention two numbers that I believe are very, very important. The number of irregular arrivals last year were 380,000. The number of asylum applications were 1,150,000. It was a 20% increase compared to 2022. It is obvious that this trend is not sustainable. This is why the pact needs to go hand in hand with a strong external dimension, with comprehensive partnerships with our neighbors and countries of origin. And this is why we also need to send a very clear and strong political message that we are determined to fight smuggling. More than 90% of irregular arrivals to the European Union are done through smuggling networks. So as long as we don't manage to control this, I'm afraid that we are going to have a very hard time in implementing the pact. The second is funding. As I said before, for the first time, we have such detailed obligations along every step of the way, what member states are expected to do. Legally binding obligations in regulations. When the Commission presented the pact, it clearly stated that the funding to implement the pact would come from European funds. And this is going to be crucial. The preparation for the implementation of the pact, the implementation plans of the European Union, of the member states, provide us with an excellent opportunity to think about how we can put some costs on what the pact entails as obligations. And this should inform our wider discussion about migration and the European budget. We will start discussing the European budget in the summer of 2025. And it is important that this time around, since we know that we have specific European obligations coming from legislation for member states, that we also provide the funding. Otherwise, we again run the risk of the pact not being implemented appropriately. I come to the third point, which is mandatory solidarity. I believe that politically, this is the most important innovation of the Pact. It is because so far, we were always talking about a balance between solidarity and responsibility, but there was never a legal obligation for the solidarity part. We reached a compromise. We reached a compromise on a minimum threshold of 30,000. And obviously for many, this was not the level of ambition that we would have wanted. We also believe that it does not correspond to reality. However, we also created a mechanism, the annual report of the European Commission and the decision of the Council, that will have to reflect on the estimate of the Commission, which will come from specific data, objective data. So in October 25, the Commission will present its first report, annual report. If we see what is happening today, 380,000 irregular arrivals, 23, 300,000 irregular arrivals, 22. If the Council comes up with a number that is close to 30,000, obviously we will have a huge mismatch between what is happening on the ground and how we decide to handle it. This will also be associated with resources, with staff, with funding. So it is up to us to decide whether we are going to face these challenges together or whether we will leave the frontline member states again alone to deal with these issues. Finally, I'm going to talk about two things that are not in the Pact. And these are the European asylum and return decisions. It is not about the Pact, but what we do with the output of the Pact. So basically, we created an internal management system to determine very quickly who has a right to stay, who deserves international protection, and who does not have a right to stay in the Schengen area and should be returned as fast as possible. In our opinion, we need to bring, along with these two elements, European responses, which would mean European asylum decisions that would be recognized by all EU member states and European decisions. In the meantime, and until we reach this point, we should do everything in our power to allow for the easiest mobility for beneficiaries of international protection. And we still have the opportunity to do it. The negotiations on the long-term residence directive are still open. So we still have a chance in the next term to give an answer and to show that out of solidarity to the people in need, we are recognizing that they are going to stay in the European Union and we allow them to set their roots in the Union as a whole. And secondly, for European return decisions, because at the end of the day, in order for the system to be sustainable, we need to be able to make returns to the countries of transit and origin, which means, again, for those who do not have the right to stay in the Schengen area, which means, again, that we should stop wasting our resources in trying to move people around the European Union and put all our efforts to returning those that should be returned to the countries of transit and origin. So this was a very short overview, I hope, of the main elements we believe are there for us to determine whether we succeed or not. And I'll be happy to speak on more detail about the responsibility elements later on. Thank you.
Or HP will. Okay. So now, thanks a lot, Grigoris, because while you also open, I mean, to what will come next after the implementation, because I mean we are going to be soon at the beginning of a new legislature, and the question will be, okay, what's next? Okay, let us assume that indeed we have a pact which is properly implemented within the 2 years deadline, which is set for its implementation. What do we still have to do to, I mean, come to a very comprehensive European asylum and migration system? The two ideas that you raised at the end of your presentation are part of this possible agenda, and also you very rightly hinted also at what is, I think, one of the main challenges for the next 5 years, which is the negotiation of the next financial forecast, including a decent contribution to solidarity in the area of migration. At this point in time of the panel, may I already ask the audience, in person and virtual, to start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask during the Q&A session that will follow the presentation by the panelists. We would like to have an as seamless as possible conversation. For those of you who are online, I have next to me a fantastic electronic device which would in principle allow me to show your question when you are going to ask it. So don't hesitate to start putting questions in the chat box already at this point in time. I was referring to solidarity. The next speaker will be Alexander Sorel, who is a senior advisor to the executive director of the EU Asylum Agency. I mean, for those of us who were at the origin of the creation of agencies, whether it was the border agency or the asylum support office at the time, they were seen also as a way to meet the need for more solidarity between member states by providing them not financial support, but technical support when it was coming to the implementation of EU legislation. Now, of course, since then, both of them have gained more operational responsibilities. There is no European Asylum, no EASO anymore, but a European Asylum Agency. And of course, seemingly, everybody is looking at the agency to play a key role in the implementation and possibly, in a not so distant future, in the monitoring of the implementation of this new pact. So, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. My voice is a bit, I travel too much. It's good to be in Brussels. It's always good to be in Brussels. And even though I left officially 7 years ago, it's always nice to see some familiar faces in the audience. And indeed, you and I go back a long way. And I remember in the Hague program, we weren't even allowed to talk about an agency or a support office. It was appropriate structure. So we came a long way on that. We at EOA, of course, welcome the agreement on the new pact. The current CEAS system, the Common European Asylum System, was never designed for the challenges we face today and we faced earlier, and I don't need to repeat which ones there were. The reform was much needed, and finally we took indeed a big step forwards. But getting a renewed acquis is one thing. Implementing that into practice is a challenge on its own. And here we think we can play a key role to support the Commission and Member States in achieving that implementation. And from the outset, let me emphasize that from us, it will be supporting all Member States. So both the ones at the external borders, but also the others, because the questions which I don't link much to were referring especially to the border Member States. The role of the EOA is, in short, is to support Member States with their implementation and work towards a more harmonized European approach. We do and will keep on doing that with our operational and permanent support to asylum and reception authorities in Member States. And this role does not change under the new pact. We do, however, expect that it brings us additional work and activities. More specifically, inside the house, we are looking at 4 pillars of activities. The first one is to prepare our agency's own activities towards the new acquis, which is threefold: updating our existing products, tools, guides, training modules, etc. Second is developing new ones that are required by the new legislation. And the third one is putting in place other preparations to be able to deliver the support that might be needed. The second pillar is to support the Commission in developing the common implementation plan. The third is that if needed and requested, support member states in drafting and developing their plans. And fourth is, if need be, help them to execute them. Of course, the latter will depend very much on individual needs because no member state is the same. So to manage and coordinate our efforts effectively within the limited resources we have, we will apply a so-called program approach, which brings together some 10 plus thematic projects under one umbrella within the agency. And it will enable us to plan and manage all the different supports needed from us while rationalizing the resources. Now turning still to the procedures at the border, more specifically, and some of you in the audience remember in the past to the Pact, we did some interesting simulations on that. Because member states will need to have sufficient human and financial resources. Staff will also need to have had the appropriate training, sufficient reception capacity needs to be ensured, and it also needs to be appropriately, appropriate, thinking of children and families with children. The agency can support, but we'll emphasize that, of course, the main responsibility for the implementation is with the member states. Of course, we cannot recruit staff from member states, but we can train them. We can assist with designing reception and enhancing capacity. Looking at the asylum border procedure more specifically, this could mean, for instance, supporting development of adequate capacity for border procedures, ranging from reception infrastructures, structure levels, and types of human resources needed to conclude the asylum procedure in the 12 weeks prescribed, including appeals. We can also adapt, and we will adapt, like I said, our permanent support to the new legislative framework, which we think will help member states also to prepare and implement the new rules. Meeting the vulnerable applicants in procedure is a challenge on its own and should be mentioned separately. It will require thorough member state preparations. And the necessary support, if the necessary support cannot be provided to such applicants, the border procedure will not and cannot be applied. In addition, according to the APR, families with minors must reside in reception facilities appropriate to their needs, in line with the interests of the child, which brings another challenge in the field. So ultimately, when it comes to the new pact, the proof is in the pudding while it's being eaten. And as we've seen in the negotiations throughout the years, implementation means that the entire pact needs to be implemented. So indeed, discussing responsibility now and solidarity in the next panel is, like you said, two sides of the same coin. Member states will have 2 years to implement a tremendously changed system while continuing to deal with an already heavily existing caseload of applications. Political support and sufficient resources will be key to turn this renewal of the SIAS into a success. We will be there to help, and all we can say it's a joint effort that we need to do together with all stakeholders to make this a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And thanks also for those following this discussion online, because I mean, I already have 4 questions in the chat box. So conversation will continue immediately after intervention of this first panel, but that should not prevent you in the room to start also thinking about a question that you would like to ask. Catherine Woollard is, of course, known by everybody as the director of the European Council on Refugee and Exile. That is to say, Catherine, in a nutshell, the voice of the civil society. Okay, what is the civil society and what are the civil society organizations thinking about this agreement? But I would like maybe to be more precise in my question. I attended 2 weeks ago a first panel about the pact, what it was, and a lot of concerns were expressed about safeguard and protection. We've heard from the commissioner that we should in principle be reassured because all safeguard and all protection safety nets were provided by the pact, but clearly, I mean, that was not the opinion of many people in the room or in the panel I participated in too. So maybe you might wish to further elaborate on that in your initial intervention. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll cover that. I'm going to cover 2 points. The first is a summary of the changes in responsibility as we see them. And then secondly, the implications for implementation of those changes in responsibility for states. In terms of the division of responsibility among states, we would agree with the points already made that there is an increased responsibility of the states at the external borders. And that is for various reasons that have been mentioned. The adequate capacity in terms of the minimum number in the border procedure, 30,000 has to be 30,000 at any one time, rising to 120,000 potentially at any one time, whereas the solidarity pledge on 30,000 is a pledge. The rules actually allow less relocation, and that may not be implemented. The removal of entitlement to solidarity if states don't take back applicants is another element, extended duration of responsibility. I would also add obligatory differential treatment of different caseloads, including the obligatory harsher treatment of subsequent applications and the complex exemptions for vulnerable groups, which is welcome, even though there's an overall erosion in treatment of vulnerable groups. But the exemptions are important, but add to the complexity. In terms of implications of all of this, the first point I would mention is in relation to Jean-Louis' point there, is the implications for the relationship between the state and the applicant. And there we see there is a change in balance between the two. Our estimation is that fewer people will receive protection even when they need protection, because more people will be having their applications heard in substandard asylum procedures. And that doesn't mean they'll be returned, though. That remains a perpetual challenge. The return rate is at 21%, despite the massive efforts that are put into return. So I think there's a risk of increased number of people in limbo, and also increased number of people in situations of destitution, primarily because of the interaction between the procedural side and changes to the RCD. And those situations of destitution, of course, imply suffering, but also create political challenges. There will be quite immense pressure on applicants because they will have to request their rights, including to legal counselling, at a number of different stages, and may be involved in up to 3 legal challenges at the same time. If they're challenging asylum decisions, return decisions, and requesting the right to remain, because the automatic suspensive effect of an appeal is no longer in place. That has to be requested, which adds to administrative burden and legal challenges. The treatment of subsequent applications is very harsh, and it presumes that people get a fair trial initially, which is often not the case. I think underlying this is the idea of deterrence, but in fact, people won't be deterred. I mean, most people arriving in Europe do have protection needs. Last year, the protection rate at first instance was 53%. If we include also humanitarian protection status, those are Eurostat figures. 1/3 of cases are then provided with a positive decision on appeal. So the risk is a situation where people continue to arrive, but the treatment of them is harsher. Moving on to the implications on the states of the change in responsibility and divisions of responsibility. I think this is very open, and it will depend on decisions that are made about implementation. So one question is, will states react by engaging in unlawful denial of entry at the borders? That has been one of our concerns throughout. Will those kind of actions continue to be treated with impunity? There's been a lot of discussion about changes to the safe third country concept, but the more notable form of externalization is simply by denying access at the borders rather than transferring people to Rwanda. The safe third country concept is eroded because effective protection is a lower standard. The connection criterion remains, but it will be under severe attack next year. But the real risk is not Rwanda, it's Turkey, Serbia, Bosnia as countries that will have increased responsibilities. And my final points in terms of implications, will states at the borders decide to move directly to the special regimes? I think this is a key question. The solidarity mechanism in our assessment is not persuasive enough to ensure their support. We would imagine that at least 8 states will move to crisis, force majeure or instrumentalization regimes. That creates the implications of more difficulty in terms of monitoring, but also the risk of deharmonization and possibly increased onward movement. That sounds like a very bleak picture. ECRE, of course, has never been a fan of the pact, but we accept it is the reality. And I think that comes to my really final point, which is the choices about implementation, and echoing some of the points made by the panelists, that it needs to be comprehensive and not selective. It needs to look at all implementation gaps, including long-standing implementation gaps. So it's not just, and it cannot just be about enforcing the border procedure. It has to be about tackling long-term appalling reception conditions, tackling the asylum lottery. Those are the causes of onward movement, of neglect of people's rights and unfairness within the system. So without that, I think there's a challenge. And for that, we need to see an assertive commission taking an even-handed approach and a strong role for the EU Asylum Agency in ensuring that comprehensive implementation in line with EU and international law. Voilà. If I may add just a final point, I think there's also then the decision of the member states if they will implement in good faith, and also if they have genuinely accepted that the reform is over, and they're states who feel unhappy by one or other element of the reform already suggest more reforms, which is, for those of us who've spent an inordinate amount of time analysing these reforms. And I was particularly concerned to see that the EPP election manifesto from just 2 weeks ago includes a commitment to ensure fundamental reform of European asylum law. So states need to focus on implementation of the law and not engaging in futile efforts to outsource people to countries who won't take them when they're already doing enough, and not on engaging in another process of reform in their perceived own interest.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and also thank you for having, exactly like Grigoris, already looked, look at what could come next, or what should come next, or what should not come next in your last and final comment. So thanks to the 4 panelists, because we are right on time. We still have a good 20-25 minutes for a Q&A session now. As I said earlier, I have already 4 questions lining up in the chat box. And basically, I will try to regroup the topics which are under these 4 questions, because they are quite similar. The first topic is related to cooperation in the area of readmission and return. What is envisaged in view of improving the performance of the EU member states when it comes to returning failed asylum seekers? Of course, with regard to the implementation of the existing or still to be negotiated readmission agreement. And there is one specific question, and there, okay, we could also ask the distinguished representative of the Belgian presidency who are in the audience, and then we'll come back at the end of this session with concluding remarks. There is a question about the recast of the return directive. I mean, is it definitely over? I mean, is it will it stay there for the next legislature, or are there still expectations that some progress could be made? So about return and readmission in general, I don't know which panelists feel comfortable with tackling this first question. Maybe you, Grigoris, or you, Alexander, too?
Sure, yes, thank you very much. Yes, return and readmission is an element in this equation that is very, very critical. Right now, almost everybody that arrives in the European Union stays, regardless of whether they have a right to do so or not. And if we do not find a way to increase our effectiveness when it comes to returns, obviously no system will ever work because there will always be an incentive to arrive illegally. We should take into account that the legal way of coming to the European Union is more cumbersome and takes much longer than arriving illegally. And arriving illegally puts lives in danger. And this is why it is crucial to make it a priority for us. Now, we have, again, the tool, it's there. It is going to happen. It's the negotiation of the return directive. It will not happen before the elections, but right after the elections, we will have to talk about it. We believe that we could also address it as a regulation and start from the beginning to take into account all the experience that we have so far. The Commission has done a tremendous work in the last 2 years. I have seen it with my eyes, with the return coordinator, with bringing member states together, with trying to improve the effectiveness. And this is something that we need to do in order to preserve our asylum system. Now, one of the elements that we would see necessary in such a reform is also the common return decisions, so that we would put an end to the constant abuse of the asylum system by people who simply want to prolong their stay, even though they know that they do not have a right to stay at the end of the day. So this is a discussion that will take place for sure, and we are very hopeful that it will contribute to the better implementation of the entire pact. It's critical.
Thank you very much. Any other comment on this question? Yes, Catherine, please.
Yes, I mean, while return is part of any asylum and migration policy, it's not the answer to everything, and not least because return is the area that depends on cooperation with other countries. And despite whatever possible efforts to bribe, pressure, and cajole them into cooperating, they are actors in their own right and don't always cooperate. I think it's hard to see how more resources and more attention can be focused on return. I mean, the measures you outlined are already extensive, and still return remains low. So I think it's just a question of reality that increasing the return rate will not resolve everything. And the approach needs to be about, firstly, ensuring that people actually have access to a protection status when they need it, so that you're not increasing the pool of people who cannot be returned for valid reasons, looking at other statuses where possible, increasing regular pathways for people to come for economic and employment reasons so that they're not going into the asylum track. Every member state is desperate for workers. The way that is done is very haphazard. And even some things that sometimes remain taboo, such as regularization, have to be considered, because these are all ways to deal with a pool of people who cannot be returned, as well as minimizing that number in the first place. If I may add, I mean, the questions of inclusion come in very strongly, and that is about people with protection statuses, ensuring that they have access to rights so that they don't then engage in movement, regularizing movement for people with protection, but also looking at other categories of people.
Alexander, you wanted to add something?
Yes, just very briefly, because return is not our mandate. The Frontex colleagues have it much more in their mandate. But of course, asylum procedures and return procedures are one chain. That it is linked, and they should be linked as much as possible. And we work together with the return coordinator that on the things that we can add. Basically, there's data on what potentially could be the category of return, because that is still not known. And of course, you should always start to talk about the options to individuals as soon as possible in the procedure, so that they can be integrated, they can be accessed, but they can also be returned, so that it's not something that just suddenly comes up to them.
Thank you very much. A second set of questions in the chat box has to do with, and maybe I could or turn to you again, Catherine, because you mentioned that the approximation of member states' position concerning the concept of safe third countries, and more in general, the so-called externalization of asylum procedure. Over to you.
So the changes in the APR as they stand, I would mention 3 points on that. There is an erosion in the concept of safe third countries, in the sense that the threshold for a country to be considered safe is lower than is currently the case under the APD, because the notion of effective protection, which is sufficient, is not the same as the current standard, which is to be able to obtain and access refugee convention level status. So that's already an issue. The connection criterion remains for now, but I imagine the Danish presidency, even though Denmark is not implementing a bound by the APD, will make a push on removing that criterion, which would be unfortunate. All of those points are about increasing the distance between EU asylum law and international refugee law, which is problematic, but may be halted to some extent by the courts. Right now, the Luxembourg court is hearing a very important case in relation to safe third country concept. And I think the parameters and how this works in practice will be set by the courts, and hopefully in a good way. The other element of the change is allowing states to bypass the effective protection threshold, but not the connection criterion, in the case that there's an agreement with a third country. This is something that we're highly concerned about as well. It is in there. Despite all of that, I don't think we're going to see a mushrooming of Rwanda-style agreements. It's been decades that these efforts to outsource responsibility to third countries have been taking place. I think the first detailed formal discussion at Council was in 2003. And still, it just doesn't lead to much. It doesn't mean that these aren't damaging efforts. They undermine often protection in the target countries rather than reinforcing protection. Most people in need of protection are hosted elsewhere in the world, not in Europe. So it is badly perceived by other countries. It can undermine other foreign policy objectives. It can be counterproductive because you do deals with leaders who are themselves repressive and creating displacement, etc. So it's not good, but it's not that there is a revolution in terms of the change in legal standards. There is an erosion, and I think it is a perpetual theme with states and new interior ministers thinking that this is the answer when in fact it is not. So I will leave that there. I mean, maybe as a final point, I think one of the few positive elements that didn't, in terms of what was not accepted, is where the text ends on Article 36 and the idea of mandatory use of inadmissibility procedures on the basis of safe third country that was proposed in 2016 would really have been the end of protection in Europe. So at least that. It is an option, but not a mandatory element.
Thank you very much. And this leads me very directly to the third set of questions that were asked by the external or the online audience. I will read one of these questions. The external dimension is key for migration flows to the EU. What role do you foresee in the next legislative cycle, MFF, Grigoris, you referred to that, for international partnership with countries in the neighborhood, but also beyond countries of origin? How could this affect the EU's standing in the world? Who wants to chip in on this subject? Grigoris, yes, please.
Thank you very much. I already mentioned it in my initial remarks that the Pact is an internal management system. It cannot work without an active external dimension to our migration policy. And we need to realize that the European Union is not an island. We are members of the international community. We have responsibilities, and our partners also have responsibilities, and we need to share these responsibilities with them. So it's not about externalizing responsibility. It is about sharing responsibility in accordance with the obligations that we have all undertaken according to international law. I will not go into the safe third country concept because one way or the other, we have already agreed that it will be reviewed. So there is more discussion to be made on that. But it is crucial to always remember that the sustainability of our asylum system, which is critical if we want to be able to provide international protection, is dependent upon the numbers that it is called upon to handle. If the number is ever increasing, it is obvious that this will not be possible, especially in a situation where budgets are tightening and our communities, our societies, and we see this in elections taking place all across Europe, put migration very, very high on the agenda. So we need to take all these elements into account to make sure that the entire system is sustainable, is viable. And for this, inevitably, we will have to take action. We will have to put our money where our mouth is. And this will also have to be reflected in the next MFF. It is a matter of partnership with our neighbors, with the countries of origin. It is a tool to fight smuggling and to direct flows through legal means to increase legal migration, to increase talent partnerships, and to take the wind out of the sails of smuggling. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have Alexander and Lilian on that topic. Alexander first and then Lilian.
That there's a link between internal and external is as old as we're talking about this subject, and that the fact that we have our internal house now, at least on paper, in order and hopefully implemented, doesn't indeed, and it's just a fact, that the influx makes a difference. Having said that, we are an agency that primarily helps member states, but we also have a mandate on the external dimension. It's a small one, but it's growing indeed because of all the things that you heard before. We spend now 1% of our budget, which is a total of 180 million. So 1% you can guess, and then we have external financing from DG NEAR and DG NEAR and INPA. What we do is we support, first of all, the candidate countries, then the neighborhood, which is the Western Balkan, Turkey and MENA, Egypt, for instance, and then as the third, we have the whole of route. So if there's a country of origin, in the past it was around the fall of Kabul, then we look at those things as well. But it is small, and it's not operations with boots on the ground like we do in member states, but it's capacity building, and third countries are quite increasingly interested in cooperating with us, and of course we always cooperate with international partners like UNHCR, IOM, and ICMPD.
Lilian.
Yes, coming back also to the concept of talent partnership that Grigoris mentioned. So this is also part of the policy framework that the Commission presented. And thinking of what comes after the Pact, it would be important to see that some elements of these ambitions, such as co-development opportunities with training opportunities also in the country of origins, or more robust labor mobility or legal labor mobility opportunities in the EU are realized. So the mention of talent partnerships was also present in the recent cooperation framework with Egypt. So the Commissioner also spoke of also the creation of a talent partnership within this framework. So it would be important to see also these more ambitious plans that would foresee different modes of access into the Union territory for the possibilities of training, studies, labor mobility opportunities are also realized.
Thank you very much. This gives me a unique opportunity for a bit of an advertisement. So we organize tomorrow, together with EPC, ICMPD, and Enabel, a conference on skills recognition, which is, of course, part of the talent partnership implementation agenda. Now, the time has come to turn to you, who are present in this room. I see two hands being raised. Please, sir, first, you come first, and then you.
Yes, hi, hello, Nicola Nielsen. I'm a journalist at the EU Observer. I had a question for the Commission representative. I remember 10 years ago, sorry, from Grigoris. Yes, I understand that, yes, but you work at the European Commission. I recall that 10 years ago, the European Commission had launched this action plan to tackle migrant smuggling. And today you're telling us that 90% of irregular migrants that are entering into the EU is through smuggling. So could you tell us what went wrong in your previous action plans to tackle migrant smuggling? And what is it that you're doing different today? And, given that rather poor track record, why should we believe anything will change? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jakub Keitman from the European Commission Communications Unit in DG Home. I just want to maybe step it a little bit to a different direction, but I find it pretty interesting. Today, I saw a report from the European Foreign Affairs Council or something like that, that actually people in Europe don't consider migration as a central topic for elections. Just bluntly as that, what is your reaction to that report? Thank you.
Indeed. So, okay, so we have two questions. Grigoris, maybe you have something to say, not pretending to fight that you are not representing the Commission.
So yes, I will not take ownership of the action plan because it's the Commission's, but still, obviously, we are all part of those efforts. And in this spirit, I would have to say that first, migration is here and it will always be here. And smuggling operations will also be here. So we will always be have to fight this phenomenon. Second thing is that, as was already mentioned, anti-smuggling efforts and in general, anything that has to do with the area beyond our borders, obviously depends on the cooperation with third countries. And as we all know, the Mediterranean basin has been through several cases of instability around in different areas in different times. So obviously, we have seen that smuggling operates in the sense of communicating vessels. You close one route, another one opens up, and this continuously happens. At the same time, however, I believe we are learning from this experience. So I believe that we are becoming better. There is now wide agreement that not only should we speak about it, but also take action along these lines. And this is reflected in the amount of investments, in the comprehensive agreements that we pursue, in the fact that we look into capacity building, and at the end of the day, in recognizing along with our partners around the Mediterranean that it is in our common interest to fight smuggling and to save lives. This will never be black and white. We will never have 100% success in these efforts, but it is important, even if we manage to make the 90%, 80, 70, it will be a win. It will be an improvement. And this is what we need to work on. And with regard, just a quick note to the poll that you mentioned, I'm not sure whether this is the case. What we see is that migration is an important topic across the European Union. Everybody is following it very closely. And this is why I think we all have an obligation to listen to our societies and to act accordingly. And this is why I think everybody considered that this was such an important achievement to manage to show to the people that we can agree on these sensitive files. Thank you.
On that last point, if you allow me, yes, please.
Yes, so maybe come in on the question of smuggling. Globally, there are record levels of people who are forcibly displaced. Almost all refugees have to use a smuggler to reach protection. And that's just an unfortunate fact. And otherwise, they cannot escape from the situation of persecution, conflict, violence that they face. In addition, the International Initiative Against Organised Crime shows very convincingly that the more restrictions there are, the more lucrative the smuggling business becomes and the more dangerous the organised criminal groups involved in it. So I think in that context, of course, the role that smugglers play is extremely damaging and dangerous. And for refugees, they have no choice. The only way to deal with that would be a massive a massive expansion in safe and regular routes to reach protection, which is has been a priority for the Commission, but member states are not really offering many pledges there. Other regular routes for people to reach protection or to reach safety, even if it's not within a protection framework, and also doing more to actually limit the level of forced displacement in the first place. So those are, in the long term, the only way to tackle or reduce smuggling business. In terms of public opinion, it's interesting that for these European Parliament elections, as with the last round, migration and concern about migration is not high in European public opinion when you look at Eurobarometer statistics. I think that the risk is that it's extremely important for small segments of the population, and in a situation where many member states are faced with immense political fragmentation in the sense of many political parties competing, it becomes smaller segments of the population that have more extreme views become more important. If you can be the biggest party in the country with 12% or 15%, then you're targeting 15% who may be those who have extreme views on this issue. I would also add very interesting public opinion surveys that show across most of Europe, public opinion towards migration is actually improving. People are more positive than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago about the role that immigrants play in their societies. So those things we don't often hear in the debate, but when you look in the granular detail of public opinion, it's much more nuanced than we would be led to believe.
Lilian?
Yes, one more complementary comment on smuggling. There is the possibility now to decriminalize humanitarian assistance. There is the ongoing negotiations of the update of the facilitators package, and this will be also an important opportunity to clarify what constitutes the crime of smuggling and what purpose the motive, the financial gain motive should play in such criminalization, because we have seen in the last decade a rise also in the criminalization of NGOs for providing humanitarian assistance, or of migrants themselves for helping their families to transit with the so-called self-smuggling, quote unquote. So I think that this is also an important opportunity as we are discussing the update on the smuggling framework and combating the crime of smuggling.
Thank you, Lilian. I'm afraid that we are slowly but surely getting to the closure of that first panel. By the way, what you just said is answering another question which was now put in the chat box about, I mean, how to ensure that while being more efficient in combating smuggling, we still offer to the people actually in need of international protection the possibility to access the EU, an EU member state, and ask for that international protection. So that's part of the answer of the question. There is another question there, but apparently people have, maybe I was not very good in introducing yourself as a moderator, problem to identify whom you are representing, because I mean, you are seen as a representative of the Commission and you are seen as a representative of ICMPD. So there was a question asked to you about ICMPD mandate, but I will protect you from that question. Now, so just two last final rather provocative comments from my side. I accept it concerning the polls and the public opinion. I mean, I'm neither reassured, not concerned by what you say. My take has always been that okay, there is a concern related to whatever concern, whether it is found or not, related to migration in the background of many of our public opinion, and it would suffice of a migration-related incident in any of our member states, 3 or 4 weeks before the election, take France or Germany, for instance, to have a dramatic emotional influence on the outcome of the polls. That is, I think, where the problem lies. Last but not least, and there I will be deliberately provocative, about relation with third countries. I mean, well, you quoted the agreement with the memorandum of understanding with Egypt. To my knowledge, Mr. Sisi is one of the heads of state who congratulated Mr. Putin for his re-election. So my question to the Commission is, do you consider the possibility of striking such an MOU with Belarus? And if not, why? So I will leave you with that now, and I will. So we have now 15 minutes for a coffee break, which is a unique opportunity for networking, as you said it yourself. And then I will pass the floor to Elena and the next panelist. Thank you very much for your participation.
Good morning and a warm welcome back to all participants who joined us earlier this morning and to everyone who is just now joining us, as well as all of our online attendees. My name is Helena Hahn. I'm a policy analyst in the migration program of the European Policy Center, and I have the pleasure of moderating the second panel of today's conference. Now, the first session focused on responsibility provisions under the new Pact, though we did also already enter discussions around solidarity, but specifically questions around the extent to which the new system for processing arrivals and asylum claims will be as efficient as they are fair, and the steps that must be taken to adequately prepare for the implementation of these new rules. Now, against this background, this panel, and I won't be using the coin metaphor again, but indeed we will shift to solidarity. And with me today to discuss how the balance between member states' responsibilities and the new provisions on solidarity under the new Pact will play out, and to reflect on the functioning of the foreseen system are our distinguished panelists for this session, which I have the pleasure of introducing. We have with us Philippe Bruycker, who is professor at the Institute for European Studies at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Thank you for joining us. We also have Esther Pozo, who is the head of the asylum unit at DG Home at the European Commission. Then to my left, we have HB Schreinemachers, who is the head of unit for justice and home affairs at the permanent representation of the Netherlands to the EU. And finally, at my far left, we have Raphael Bossong, who is the deputy head of EU/Europe Research Division at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. Thanks for joining us here in person. This session will be structured as the previous one. We will start by hearing from all the speakers some initial reflections on the topic, after which everybody will be given a chance to react. And I will then open up the floor for questions, both from all of our in-person attendees as well as our online audience. And so, as before, everybody is invited to already start reflecting during the speakers' interventions. As we have only limited time, a lot of ground to cover, and we want to make sure that our audience gets enough chance to raise questions, I would like to already thank the panelists for sticking to the allotted time of 6 minutes. Now, without ado, I would like to hand over to Philippe for initial remarks and reflections on solidarity under the new Pact. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. 6 minutes, 6 ideas. So the first one is looking a bit backwards. And I see Jean-Louis de Brouwer there. It reminds me some of its efforts 20 years ago. The Pact reminds me some of its efforts to try to implement the method of coordination that at one time was called also the method of open coordination in the area of migration and asylum. And I don't know what you think about this, but I have the impression that bit by bit we go there. Because with the Pact, the Commission, you will not anymore deal with legislation, but will start dealing really with implementation. And we will have national action plans, EU action plans for implementation, also an EU plan and national plans. So there will be an interaction between the European and the national levels. So I think that there, I don't know if it's a progress, because you can say 20 years, God, we are progressing very slowly. You can say, the European integration is a long-term process. So finally, we go there bit by bit, and it's positive. Just to finish on this point, what I think is interesting is the emergence of a policy cycle in the area of migration and asylum. And this makes me think once again about the employment policy, where you have a policy cycle. You could also even think about the economic policy cycle, of course, which is much more elaborated, but I think that we are here at the beginning of something, and let's wait and see how it will evolve. About this process, policy cycle, maybe one question which I consider as being a weakness of the process. I am surprised that at least explicitly, nothing in this policy cycle is foreseen regarding evaluation, assessment, monitoring, and then recommendation to member states. I think that this is a lack in this new process. Second point, what I would call the paradox of solidarity and responsibility. When you read the AMMR and the chapter on solidarity, first of all, you need to settle really to make sure that you understand it. But if you try to understand it, what I think surprising is that actually it is much more about responsibility than solidarity. Even the definition under Article 5 in 6 points, you have one about solidarity. And the rest is about responsibility, and the word fair sharing of Article 80 of the treaty does not appear. So there is this paradox, but I think it is also quite logical that because solidarity doesn't go without responsibility. But what I think will be probably quite interesting is to see how the Commission will evaluate the efforts of benefiting member states in terms of responsibility and to balance that in order to see how much they are offered in terms of solidarity. Because it will not be solidarity to give something without taking responsibilities. And I'm sure that Esther will have some ideas about this. So now, my third point is the idea of complexity. I have already said that reading the IMMR is a difficult exercise. Well, if you compare the current mechanism in the Pact regarding solidarity with the previous Commission proposal of 2016, where it was only about relocation, you are astonished now by the level of complexity. The proposal of 2016 was very rudimentary. Now we have a very sophisticated framework, and in that framework, I think something very important is the role of the European Commission with a lot of discretion regarding the asylum migration annual report and regarding the determination of the benefiting member states. And I think that there, the Commission will have an enormous responsibility, a very difficult task to also build trust among the member states and to operationalize that mechanism. Fourth idea, mandatoriness. Yes, solidarity is flexible, but nevertheless, relocation will be mandatory, not for member states, but for asylum seekers. And there I have a question, is it possible to combine mandatoriness for asylum seekers and avoiding secondary movements? If you force asylum seekers to move because of relocation, are you not creating the conditions for pushing them, incenting them actually to then move once again to go where the member states where they want to go? Fifth idea, burden sharing, burden shifting. It's interesting to notice that financial solidarity can be implemented in third countries, within third countries. So it will be possible for the contributing member states to give money to projects implemented within third countries. I'm obliged, of course, to be rough here, but my question is there behind that no risk of burden shifting than a burden sharing with third countries? And after all, we are speaking about solidarity. We know that most of asylum seekers and refugees are welcomed in third countries and not in Europe. So there, I think we should also pay attention to the idea of solidarity with third countries. And then my last and sixth point, the idea of reversal. And I leave you with that. I know it is provocative and you will say a bit simplistic, but within the 6 minutes that I have, I just want to say a word about the experience that we have with Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainians finding asylum in the European Union on a basis which is the reverse of the Dublin mechanism. No responsibility determination, freedom of movement, and it works. So we manage to welcome millions of Ukrainians, and we seem to have a problem. It has been said several times this morning with 1 million, an enormous figure, but is it that enormous if you compare it to Ukrainians? And there we have a lot of difficulties. Well, I wanted to leave you also with that idea to think, because it is personally for me quite disturbing. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, for dissecting the AMMR and already highlighting some of the issues that I'm sure we'll be picking up, other speakers will pick up, and that will likely come up in the subsequent discussion. I'm now very happy to hand over to Esther for some initial reflections. We heard it in the commissioner's statement. The mantra is implementation, implementation, implementation. So I would invite you to the floor to share a little bit more about that. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation to speak in this panel. I'm slowly recovering from December, so I'm still not in my full. Normally, I'm a bit more plummy, but I lost many kilos in the come up to December. Also because the Spanish presidency didn't allow for food. So just maybe a quick word to say the commissioner was trying to simplify the pact in one sentence, and what it means for us is better border control, fairness among member states, protection of those in need. These are the three pillars that are fundamental, at least from the Commission point of view, when it comes to implementation. And of course, we are now in the process. The legal framework gave us a mandate an obligation to the Commission to develop a common implementation plan with gap analysis. And what is our goal? First of all, to be comprehensive. I have to disagree with some of the people that said, oh, the pact focuses only on the internal and not about the external. Well, I will read you, as what Philippe said, maybe if you have a sleepless nights, to go and look into the MMR and read the 2,000 pages of legal acts that we have, by the way. We have a comprehensive approach. There is a first chapter, which is about governance, and this comprehensive approach also includes partnerships with third countries. So it is not true that the pact focuses only on the internal. It also covers another aspects, including return, including legal pathways, including partnerships with third countries. So for us, the first goal is precisely to honor that comprehensiveness. And secondly, we're trying to make the pact digestible when we talk about a common implementation. As I said, it's 2,000 pages of legal obligations. It's not possible to do everything by 2026. So our idea is to say how we can reorganize the pact in comprehensive building blocks that we think are the fundamentals that need to be in place by June 2026, hopefully, if it's voted in a 2 weeks' time, and the member states will have these 2 years to prepare. So building blocks approach. And when we talk about building blocks, we're not looking only at one provision or one directive or one regulation. We're looking at it as a whole. And we're in the process of identifying these building blocks. We have about 12 in total building blocks. And I will not explain them. Later on, if you want, we can go into the details. But what I will say is that what is very important in this process is that member states have ownership. Because as Commission, we can come out with everything we want, but if the member states then don't find themselves reflected in those building blocks, reflected in this process, it will be very difficult for us then to support member states and monitor what the member states are supposed to do, because we also have an obligation to monitor the implementation of the implementation plans. So that leads me to another element that is very important for us, that is how we can support member states. And support member states means technical support with guidelines, with tools that might facilitate the process of developing national implementation plans, but also of implementing those plans. And here it comes to the operational support, but also the financial support. But what is the goal? The goal ultimately through this common implementation plan is that all member states will be by June 2026 well prepared. If you look at the pact, and it's a pact really between different member states, between different family groups inside the member states, but also in the European Parliament, that means that all member states have to be well prepared for many of the elements of the legislation to kick off. So if you want to benefit from solidarity, you have to be well prepared. If you want to get reductions of the solidarity obligations, you have to show you well prepared. If ultimately there is a triggering of the crisis, you have to show that you were well prepared. And well prepared looks into the asylum, the reception, and the migration systems of the member states, because they are all interlinked. That's why I say that that means as well that when we come into the implementation, we have to ensure that this balance, this pact between different groups of member states and between different families, political families in the union, the left, the right, the center, will walk with the same weight. We cannot say we're going to put more emphasis on the responsibility and we're going to forget about the solidarity, or we're going to focus on the elements that are more about obligations of applicants, but we're not looking at the safeguards. Well prepared means also the capacity that you have the resources needed, but also the quality of the decision making and also the respect for fundamental rights. So all these elements have to go hand in hand, because if one falls, the whole thing will fall as well. It's a puzzle. We always presented it as a puzzle, and each piece of the puzzle is important. The responsibility rules will not work if the reception systems of the member states are not working. It will not work if the integration systems of the member states for beneficiaries of international protection are not working. We also have a lot of self-enforceability rules in the pact and incentives. If you want to reduce secondary movements, you will have an interest to pledge for relocation. If you want the countries to really do their best when it comes to responsibility, then you will also have to support them in the return and readmission. Otherwise, we will have a situation in which the cessation grant for those that have been, those asylum applications that have been processed in the asylum procedure will kick in. People will move because, as explained in the first panel, we have lots of problems with returning people that are not entitled to international protection, and they will move. And there is an understanding that some movement will have to happen, but there are also incentives in the system to balance this and to create incentives for more solidarity and also for carrying out responsibility. If you don't comply with the responsibility rules, you will not be entitled to solidarity. If you're not complying with your solidarity obligations, there is mandatory offset or the Commission can't recover the funds. So all these elements will have to go hand in hand when we look into the preparation. But how do we do it? We do it into two tracks, the multilateral track and the bilateral track. The multilateral track is about this ownership of key concepts that we have in the pact, ownership of what we all have to achieve together. Ownership about what kind of showcasing we can helping each other. There are some member states that are already quite advanced, and some of the new elements that we have in the pact, they can showcase to the other member states how to do it. And it's our role as Commission to provide these tools and these platforms that will allow member states to exchange information, exchange good practices, and also develop guidance tools and understanding of these key concepts together with the EU agencies, because they are fully into our common implementation plan effort. We consider, for example, the EUAA part of our team. There would also be the bilateral track. Also in the multilateral track, we will have discussions in expert groups. We will have discussion in the UAA networks. We will have discussions in the council. And ultimately, we want to transition the current solidarity platforms that we have into the solidarity forum, the technical level solidarity forum that is provided in the Pact, so that we can all have a common understanding and following of what's going on. What is the bilateral track? We have to do a gap analysis. We have to look at each member state where they are right now, where they need to be by June 2026. And this will be also part of our conversation. First, to have the ownership of this is what we all have to do. And then for the Commission to have a dialogue with the member states. What are your specific needs? When it comes to human resources, when it comes to changing your legislative framework, changing your administrative way of doing things, changing your organizations, building infrastructure, recruiting people, we will have this dialogue with the member states, and we can see as well how we can target the support from us, from the agency, from the funding. There will be a lot of discussions between now. Our intention is that bilateral track will run in parallel with the multilateral track, because member states will have to submit the national implementation plans by December. So that's why as well we are putting our common implementation plan earlier than expected in the legislation. We want to do it by June. So we will have enough time for this dialogue with the member states, so they will be ready by December 2024. Final thing, we want to do a dry run of the annual cycle, precisely to get everybody understanding what it means in terms of data, in terms of the resources required and the organization required. And this will also be very important. With this, I stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. This was a very insightful update on the work that is currently being done. I would like to pick up on two things which you mentioned. One, ownership, and secondly, preparedness, because I think this lends itself well to what you might be reflecting on. So I'd like to hand over to you, HP, for some reflections from the Dutch perspective on the balance between responsibility and solidarity under the new pact, as well as your thinking around the preparation for implementation. Over to you.
Thank you, and also thank you for having me here today. I want to, before I go into those questions, I want to recognize Gregory. And I'm glad I'm not on his panel or on a panel with him, not because we disagree, but because we agree so much. And that is because I think I could have read out all your opening remarks. I can subscribe to each and every one of them, even to the one wherein you say the MET5 has played a special role and has been very open to compromise. I might add that there were other member states open to compromise as well. But all in all, I think we are very much on the same boat here, which might have been different at some point during the negotiations. So with that said, I want to also go into some of the remarks that the Commissioner made in her opening statements. She mentioned a number of terms: zero-sum game, a game changer, winners or losers. And there, I would say, if solidarity versus responsibility were a matchup, then solidarity definitely has won, because it appears 256 times in the AMMR and responsibility only 88 times, maybe also in response to Professor de Bruycker. But I don't think that responsibility versus solidarity is the right frame. And I think we all alluded to that already. Showing solidarity is a form of responsibility, and the other way around. So these things definitely do go together. But solidarity, I've been asked to mainly comment on the solidarity part. Solidarity is not a distinct concept. It is not something we have to implement in 2 years' time. Solidarity starts now. And why do I say that? And why do I stress that so much? Solidarity is because we're in this together. We negotiated together, and now we have to build the system together. And to make sure, indeed, as Esther rightly pointed out, to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle are in place in the next 2 years. And a skeptic might say, I'm not saying, Professor, that you are a skeptic, although some of the phrases you used might be interpreted that way. The system is too complicated. There is no political will. The pact trumps the right of people on the move. Some might say all these things. I'm not a skeptic. I think we can prove the skeptics wrong, and now is the time. Why do I think that we can prove the skeptics wrong? And here, maybe, Esther, you took a few of my speaking points. We can prove the skeptics wrong by showing ownership and engagement by the member states and the council, by having a funding in place that focuses on the best implementation outcomes, to recognize that a common challenge also requires joint efforts, and that adequate governance and support are in order. So what does this entail? First, on the ownership. You asked me to say a few words about that. It starts with trust, and I think that's been mentioned a number of times as well. Trust doesn't come easy, you can lose it easily, but I think we have a pact. We have a mandatory solidarity mechanism, and I think the trust has been building. I attended a meeting with a number of ambassadors the other week from the north, the south, the east, and the west, and there was a lot of agreement in the room. And that is also the start of proof that something really is building here on the trust side. Second, what we need is a ownership by having the council play a very active role. Sometimes when things get complicated, the council easily outsources the problems to the commission and asks the commission to solve everything. And of course, the commission has an important role to play here, but the council does too, and the council does have to show ownership. And the way we look at it is that the council, and especially SCIFA, the Strategic Committee on Immigration, can and has to play a role. We need to have regular discussions, dare to ask for assistance from each other in these fora, dare to be transparent about the challenges that we all encounter. We dare to discuss progress reports offered by the Commission. And this is not about, everyone will always tell me, oh, HP, you want naming and shaming, you want monitoring. No, I don't want all those things. We might get there at some point down the road, but I don't want to start there. We need this confidence, we need this transparency, we need to be open, and we need to get past naming and shaming. Try to build this system together. Second point was the funding. And I said best implementation outcomes. That means for us that the plans need to focus on the challenges that we need to overcome, that member states will have to indicate what budgets they need, and from the implementation plans, it needs to be clear what results we aim for. And there again, some might say, oh, you want your fair share of the money. I say for us, the priorities are screening at the external border, adequate capacity at the asylum border procedure, and improving returns. And I think those are all aspects that especially some of the border member states would need the funds for. And I think much of that needs to go their way. Third point, joint effort. I think, Esther, you also mentioned that we need a coordination platform. We need to make sure that while implementing, we aim for convergence of our systems and make sure that we interpret the new rules in a similar way, that we implement them in a similar way, and that we don't diverge from the get-go. No, this is the time to do it in a convergent way. And the final point that I mentioned was adequate governance and support, but I think Esther has also already said something about it. A few last words on turning on the actual solidarity in the AMMR and the crisis regulation. You ask about workability and flexibility. I think it's important that all member states, and I stress all member states, take their responsibility under the solidarity clause seriously. Two, of course, we welcome also the flexibility regarding the nature of solidarity. It may come in different forms, but we might get into that a little bit more. And yes, we need to balance needs and capabilities within the member states. So I think these are elements that we really need to take on board while implementing also the solidarity mechanism. And I think I leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this already outlined some of the next steps that will have to be taken in the coming weeks and months. Now, I'd like to hand over to our final speaker for some additional reflections. So without further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll try to be short. I'm a think tanker. I'm not inside the room when these negotiations happen. I'm also not a party political think tank. So I say all this because I'm going to be more brutal or blunt. So I come from Germany, and I am not representing a party, but from my personal perspective, say there is no ownership in Germany of the pact. Maybe you see it differently here in Brussels when you negotiate, but there is no ownership. And I'll tell you first 2 or 3 things why this is the case. First of all, we all know that the current German government was very much under pressure from within its party base to change the pact as it is, and it gave in the summer. And there was a strange ping pong between, well, we can still change in the parliament, and then the parliament didn't manage as much as Germany fell. Germany was isolated. Germany had to bite the bullet, and we agreed. Yes, and Germany is getting quite a lot of things. I understand this is the perspective from the Southerners and the border procedure and responsibility, but the perception is Germany had to give in. Public, yeah. Number 2, everybody is going around in, more or less conservative governments saying we are in crisis now. And yes, lots of countries say that, but Germany actually does have a certain kind of claim to that. We do have the largest number of asylum applications. We do have the largest number of Ukrainians. Okay, we come to per capita in a moment. And this is after the 2016 crisis, where we also took the largest number of people. So maybe you've heard all this in internal sessions before, but I just want to underline the mood is really not anymore like that we can do it again. And I don't want to pass judgment, but this is the mood for a lot of people. And elections coming now in European Parliament, and there are going to be regional elections where everybody is terribly afraid of the right-wing government, right-wing party actually maybe getting a majority at a regional level. And then there are already rumors that there may be early elections this year at the national level, and at latest there's going to be next year elections. And then who's going to be the next German government? Probably the Christian Democrats. What have the Christian Democrats done? They have taken on crazy ideas. We heard about externalization for a number of reasons I won't go into, but they are serious. I think they're crazy, and I can push my paper here, unfortunately only in German, and later it's hopefully going to be in English, why they are not likely to work, and we've heard that, but they are serious. I can underline this. So the current government has really sort of maybe, hopefully not, but a risk of following what the Tories are doing right now. They're going to invest a lot of capital, eventually first starting at the regional government level where they're really pushing for this, and maybe next year when they're going to come into government. And I'm sure the Germans have done it, that the EPP has it in the election program. I don't know, I'm not a party member, but I think it must have been German pressure that they on this in the election program. And the EPP is going to win the next election. So, this is on the cards. And so basically what we have to do at the moment is to really understand, like apart from other member states, what they have to do. And yes, there's a lot of things on the ground. How is Germany going to buy this package for real? And yes, there is a lot of administrators and there is capacity. And maybe in the end, people, when they move to the technical level, it's a different ball game. But this political cell is very much in the balance at the moment. And everybody understands the impact is going to be in 2 or 3 years, and the pressure is now. And this is why this externalization is now so hot as a topic. Coming to the technical level, why it is also such a hard sell for Germany is, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to be liberally provocative here. Does anybody expect Germany to get solidarity? Honest. I think if you just calculate it on numbers, there is a good claim. Even the current EUAA says only Greece and Austria, but then we don't know how many people stay in Austria, plus Cyprus, small, admittedly, but actually get more asylum, I haven't counted on the Ukrainian temporary protection, asylum applications per capita at the moment than Germany. Italy is beneath the EU average. We know all this. I mean, it's all the, story for the last 20 years. But, if you read now the kind of report that was referred to as complex, and yes, it is complex, and it is a lot of responsibility for the Commission, it's totally unintelligible. I mean, sorry, I take the minute. I read to you the preamble, the kind of assessment. When assessing whether a member state is under migratory pressure, at risk of migratory pressure, or facing significant migratory situation, so there we start already with the complexity, the Commission, based on a broad quantitative and qualitative assessment, should take into account a broad range of factors, including, and then it goes on and on and on and on, but it means including the number of international protection applications, irregular border crossings, unauthorized movement of third country nationals, and return decisions issued in the force, transfer decisions issued and carried out, levels of arrivals by sea, vulnerabilities of asylum applicants, the capacity of a member state, the specificity of the member state's geographical location, relations with third countries, possible situation of instrumentalization of migration, everything under the sun. So it's really like, do you really count numbers, or is instrumentalization more important, or is it sea rescues more important, or is it the statelinks, or is it the secondary movement which is more important? Everything is possible here, to be honest. So, to be frank, I think nobody really expects Germany to come around and say, look our numbers, and look also our previous numbers, we deserve solidarity. I don't think it's going to happen. So let's be real. So the question is then, how on those bases can we actually sell this for the next German government and the regional heads of states, the Länder chefs, who are going to be actually in charge of pulling this through? And I think this is going to be a very difficult task for the next 2 or 3 years, plus under the shadow of the externalization, where I think, unfortunately, the CDU got itself into a corner already. And I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Raphael. You picked up on a couple of issues that I think are really important. One relates to how can the Commission, how can member states, how should they communicate about the new pact in light of the elections, but then also with an eye to managing expectations around what the impact of the new pact can be. I also picked up on a point made around the weight of the factors in determining situations of migratory pressure or otherwise. Before handing over to the audience, and again, everybody online is invited to already post questions in the Q&A, and those in front of me to please already start reflecting. I do want to give a chance to all the speakers to briefly, in 1 or 2 points, react to what was said by the others. So please, Philippe, if you would like to make a start, I'd be happy to hand over to you.
Well, very briefly, one reflection about what has just been said. I think that one interesting point on the debate between solidarity and responsibility is that we are now going to have a more objective basis to feed the discussion. When I say a more objective basis, well, there is a caveat immediately, because the Commission has so many parameters to take into consideration that there can be a part of subjectivity. But okay, I think nevertheless we will progress. And I just take the example of Italy that has been quoted. Do Italians need and deserve solidarity? If you look at asylum figures, the answer is no. Does it change a lot if you take into consideration people rescued at sea? Well, Italians do not people at sea. Very few NGOs are mostly doing the job, so they have some costs in terms of reception. But we are speaking here about some hundreds of persons, not thousands and thousands and thousands. Then there is one element, and I leave it to that, which I'm surprised that it is not quoted by the AMMR. It is borders, the length of external borders and the difficulty of controlled borders in relation with the type of borders. And there, I think that Italians have a point, maybe not like Greeks, but there they have a point. But I'm surprised that this is not mentioned into the IMMR. Is it because one considers that there are other solidarity tools for borders? I don't know.
Thank you. Perhaps a chance for you, Esther, to respond to some of the points that were made.
Actually, I'm going to disagree a bit on the issue of borders, because if you look at the definition of migratory pressure, it also talks about the geographical situation of the member state. And that's also a way of looking into the borders and precisely your location, a maritime or a country situated in the periphery of the European Union, by default, just by the geographical situation, will probably have increased burden. Actually, if you look at the definition, it talks about disproportionate obligations. And here as well is where, when we will have to do the assessment of migratory pressure, we will have to look at the different factors, because when we talk about obligations as well, which member states will have to do the bulk of border procedures, for example. So that's also an additional obligation. So indeed, we have to take into account about asylum applications. We have to look at many different factors. Also, because one of the key elements of the compromise is that any member state could be eligible for solidarity. And any member state could be eligible to have a situation in which they don't have to contribute with solidarity. And this was very important for all member states to avoid the impression that solidarity was also only about Med5, but it was about everybody. And this is a very important point that we have to keep in mind. One thing I wanted to say as well in reaction to Ukraine, the Temporary Protection Directive was based on a balance of efforts. If we look at the distribution of Ukrainians in the European Union, do we see a balance of efforts? I'm just throwing it, because everybody is saying, oh, it worked very well, everybody distributed themselves. Do they? Because look at the statistics of where they are. So maybe the balance of efforts is not so balanced. Just saying, because everybody puts the comment with Ukraine. And the final thing about financing third countries. I think we all have an interest for our neighbors to have proper asylum and protection spaces. We all have an interest. And if you look at the activities that can be financed under the financial solidarity, it's a lot about improving the asylum and reception systems of the third country. And we all have an interest of people to have proper protection, not only in Europe, also beyond Europe. So it's not so bad, actually, that we have this financial solidarity in third countries, because we also have to acknowledge, precisely as was said before, that many asylum seekers and many people in need of protection are in third countries. So we also want to have an interest on making sure that these people receive protection, so they will not feel the need to come to us for that protection. So with this, I close it. Thank you.
Thanks for the additional clarifications. HP?
Thank you. 3 quick points. To the skeptics who say they only want to focus on the external dimension or externalization, I would say it doesn't make any sense to put all your money in that on that field if you don't have a somewhat functioning internal migration system. So all the money will be to waste. So that would be my response to them. They have to go hand in hand. So it's not either or, it's both. The second is, yes, we build a complicated system. 2,000 pages, you say, okay, that's much to take in. I get that. And that's why I said we need also in the council, and we need Germany on board, and I think we do, to go about this also in a pragmatic way, making sure that this starts working. You had as example, try a couple of things out. What works in one member state, try to copy it to another member state and start working along those lines. And 3, yes, the migration is not the panacea. It's not going to solve all our problems. And we have to be open and transparent to our public about this. So there, indeed, we need to communicate this. That is not always easy for politicians, I agree. But we have to educate our politicians in that way.
Thank you. Raphael, for some
Yeah, I mean, I said I was being provocative, so it's not a foregone conclusion by no means that Germany doesn't buy this. I think there is, of course, various pathways. And from a, say, conservative perspective, if the new border procedures were to make a significant difference, well, this is a big if, then this is certainly something that is going to be sold from the German perspective to the German electorate as, look, there is more order. There is more, we know who's coming and all that comes with it. And maybe that helps to depoliticize it. But I just wanted to make this point, just overstressing it, because so long this debate has been, well, there is the interests of the Northerners who want the Southerners to or others to take more and to do more. And yes, to some extent that happened. But as I said, you're all veterans, you know all the tunes. I just would want to underline that not only is the current German government very barely scraped by to get this done, the next one doesn't seem to be sold on. And I think this has to be taken seriously, at least at this point. I just wanted to add to the maybe a slight correction to Italy, because I've been criticizing Italy here now. Italy does actually do a lot of state rescues. I mean, it's like a lot more than the kind of NGOs. So it is in the six figures. So I don't want to sort of deny that there is a specific challenge there. And again, sorry, I'm being totally undiplomatic. Of course, Germany and all the rest of EU needs Italy as a partner. We can only do this together, yes. But it is a really dangerous and slippery rope to let Giorgia Meloni to do EU migration policy for all of us. And this means both going abroad with Team Europe, and it means doing things like Italy and Albania, which creates absolutely false expectations in my impression. And if it works, it's going to come at the cost of other countries, because there is very likely going to be deflection effects. So the risk there is that now everybody tries to kind of copy that. And then we're going to run to Bosnia, to North Macedonia, to Moldova, to Georgia, and say, oh, you also want to be in the EU. Come on, do something for us. And what is that going to, I mean, whether it's going to work is one thing, but what's going to that do to our enlargement process? So I really, as I said, once more, with all respect, I really do think there has to be a pushback on that one.
Thank you. Now, I hate to cut this conversation short, but I am mindful of time. So I'd like to now open up the floor. I see we have one question in the audience, as well as one online, as well as here. I will take all three questions. If you could please keep your hand raised so I can pass you the mic. And if you could please just state your name and affiliation so that we know who you are.
Hi, I'm Mark. My background is predominantly search and rescue NGOs. I'm a consultant. I wear a lot of caps when I'm speaking in a very personal capacity. I think there's something particularly kind of Orwellian about the use of this phrase solidarity to refer to a system that, at the heart of it, focuses on accelerated procedures, reduced access to effective remedies, externalization, etc. When I think we have seen, I would contend that we've seen a very, very effective solidarity mechanism through the application of the TPD by all of the metrics that the EUAA are recording. And I'm struggling to reconcile how it is that we have such a perfect landmark demonstration of solidarity with vulnerable people on the one hand, and this trend away from solidarity with vulnerable people and towards states and procedures that continue to put them at harm and reduce access to territory and fundamental rights on the other. And I wonder if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then to Catherine.
Yes, thank you. I might come in on this question of Germany. Ultimately, isn't it the case? I mean, Germany may do a disproportionate amount within the common European asylum system, but if the common European asylum system collapses, Germany will do far more. And the other point I would note that Germany, among other countries, was insistent on not fundamentally reforming the Dublin rules. And this is what you get. Then just to all panelists, this question of solidarity, our analysis, but please tell us if we're wrong, don't hesitate. The solidarity mechanism is really not the key here to securing the support of all member states. Our analysis of the deal is that it was the special regimes and the possibility to invoke derogatory regimes that has clinched the deal. And we would expect at least 8 of the states at the borders to very quickly try and invoke one of the derogatory regimes. I think this will also lead to more people going to Germany, because the experiment of instrumentalization regimes so far is having that impact. But that's a side point. I would just be interested in how you see that in terms of the solidarity versus those options. I would leave it there.
Thank you. Since we have 3 questions, I would say roughly we have one on Germany. Then we also have one relating to the showcasing of solidarity versus signs of waning solidarity, and then also the interaction between solidarity and the possibility for derogation. So perhaps I can start with you, Esther, for some reflections.
I hear a lot of this about the Pact reduces protection, reduces effective remedies, reduces fundamental rights. I disagree. It all depends how it will be implemented. But there is nothing in the Pact per se that will mean that the people will not have access to the territory, or that the people will not be treated in a border procedure with the quality that is required. Because don't forget that we're putting in the border procedure cases that in principle, prima facie, are easy to solve, because it's very low recognition rate. So we're not talking here about doing a quick screening of non-refoulement and sending the person back. We're talking about a fully fledged asylum procedure. Asylum procedure with all the guarantees. The legal counseling also applies to the border procedure. The monitoring of fundamental rights is foremost about border. And it applies to the screening, it applies to the border procedures. There will be a particular attention to detention. EOA even has to develop guidance on alternatives to detention. In terms of effective remedies, we are not changing fundamentally the rules compared to today, but now they will have legal counseling, which is not the case today. So it will offer the possibility for the people actually to appeal, and we hope they will increase the quality of the decision making. And actually, EUAA, under the monitoring mechanism, will have to monitor the quality of the decision making, and that means the quality of the asylum decisions. So there are lots of tools that are in there that have actually increased the safeguards for applicants, including information. It's true that there will be lots of severe consequences if the people don't cooperate, if the people mislead the authorities, or they don't comply with their obligations. But if you look at the push in increase of information rights, are very significant. And if those information rights are not upheld, those consequences cannot be triggered. So now at least I think we have much more tools to monitor what's going on the ground that we had in the past years. And we should not underestimate this. And the important, as I said before, that this is a puzzle. If you're not respecting the fundamental rights, the Dublin rules will not work. The member states will not provide solidarity. So it's also part of the overall house or framework that we want to build. I disagree also, just to be provocative, that the deal was on the derogatory regimes. The deal was very much about the solidarity. And the deal was 30,000 adequate capacity, 30,000 people solidarity. That was really the heart of the deal, if I may say. Also with the cessation grounds, because it's true that the Commission had put forward a new distribution of Dublin rules, like we have diplomas, we have the siblings. Only diplomas were retained. For our siblings was going to be the most important. But then you have this issue of the cessation grounds that are new and that are significant, because now cessation, we know that responsibility is forever. And now there is an understanding that you cannot expect the member state that are going to do border procedure to be responsible for people forever. So this aspect, together with the solidarity framework, was the most important. And I don't think that this is going to be to everybody saying, oh, we're in crisis and we're going to trigger the crisis. If you look at the number of cases, the number of times that the word exceptionally is referred to in the crisis proposal. I didn't count like HP did with the number of solidarity, but it's a lot. Because from both sides, there was understanding this has to be the exception. And that's why pressure is the baseline, in a way. So for me, it was, maybe other people disagree, but for me, I think that was the big deal between inside the council, between this adequate capacity for responsibility. So there will be predictability on both sides, predictability on the number of solidarity, predictability on the number of border procedures I'm supposed to do. That it was really, really fundamental. And those safeguards and self-enforceable mechanism. The offsets, mandatory offsets, were also a key for a deal, which I think might be the most common form of solidarity in the years to come. Maybe in the future not, but I think if I might be a bit provocative. But not the crisis. So I would say that, and I think also between the Parliament and the Council, what it was really important, it was the acknowledgement of SAR, so that there will be earmarking for SAR, and safeguards that we have now introduced, like legal counseling, all the issues related to unaccompanied minors representatives. So I think those were the deal breakers rather than the derogatory regime. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come in? Yes.
Thank you. And I would fully subscribe to Esther's remarks. So that is easy, but I would like to add what I said before. This offers also an opportunity for convergence. We see that there are many differences between our systems right now, also not only in the procedures, but also in the outcomes. And I think this offers a very good chance for convergence. In response to the question about the TPD and Ukraine, I would say maybe this whole legislative process has not been always, in all aspects, an evidence-based legislative process. And that is the way maybe Europe works. I don't know. But we would like to introduce something differently, and that is evidence-based implementation. And I think, again, we have a good chance to do it that way and to learn from each other. I already said that, but also to learn from previous experiences. And there is a lot of lessons to be learned also from the Ukrainian experience that might lend themselves for implementation in the later phase. There's still some norms that need to be kind of detailed. There's still some room for some pragmatic solutions. And again, we need to learn from, for example, the experience with the TPD. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, I don't want to make this as a panel on Germany, but of course, Germany is damned if you do, damned if you don't. This is the position Germany is forever. And this is also why Germany had to concede on many grounds, I mean, no question. But this is different from ownership, right? And so whether it percolates to the implementing level, that this is actually what you have to do, I think this is the challenge now. This is what I just wanted to say. And maybe last footnote here, or two. So first of all, I actually still get confused about the offsets. I thought the offsets were rather for still maybe mostly countries that usually would have, a country like Italy, where they would usually say, if you don't get enough formal relocation, then we kind of don't take the secondary migration back. But maybe I misunderstand. So in that sense, I don't think it's to the benefit still of a country like Germany. And secondly, well, I was surprised to see that actually the Schengen reform is supposedly also happening. I thought it wouldn't. And as we all, or most of you know, there is this infamous Article 25A now, which supposedly allows now, or should allow, instant returns in internal borders of so much to the mobility of not maybe recognized, but other forms of already present persons in the EU. So a very likely scenario is we agree on this, and then we already have Germany getting used, like many other countries, to breaching EU law on Schengen, and this is a fact. It is a breach of EU law, sorry. And now it will be sort of half legalized, and we will continue to live with these kind of controls. Maybe this is a feasible compromise, but a lot of the ping pong is definitely going to happen in the next few years. That's, I think, on the cards as well. Whether we can technocratize it or make it on the technical level so people don't notice too much, perhaps. But I think a lot of people will orbit, and we have to be ready for that.
Thank you. I'm just going to raise one more question, which is by someone in our online audience. She asked, would Hungary be eligible for solidarity? Would concerns on the rule of law in Hungary block any support Hungary could get from the EU in terms of the solidarity mechanisms? Not sure who wants to make a start in addressing that question.
I will not get into it will get solidarity or not. I will just talk about the conditions. So first of all, as I said, if the member state is not well prepared, it cannot even be considered under migratory pressure. And as I said, well prepared, the way it is defined, if you look at the recitals, you look at a functioning asylum, reception, and migration system. This is one element. The second element as well is if the member state is continuously reducing the, putting a seriously the application of the functioning of the responsibility rules, the Dublin rules, the other member states are not obliged to provide for solidarity. So these are the major, I will not go into more details, but these are the two preconditions, if I may say, for a country to be eligible for solidarity or for a reduction of their solidarity obligations.
Thank you. We are now really nearing the end of the event, so I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that key to the efforts that we have just been discussing is the work being done under the auspices of the Belgian presidency. And in that context, I now have the pleasure of inviting Stijn de Decker, who is Director and Coordinator for European Affairs at the Belgian Immigration Service, to the lectern for some closing remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you to the organizers, EPC and Egmont, for organizing this meeting. Thank you for inviting us as the Belgian presidency to give some concluding remarks. I think it has been a very rich and fruitful and interesting discussion, and a lot of elements that we can take with us as well in our work as a current presidency of the Council. I have to say that from the right start of the preparations of our presidency already, we knew that the Pact and these 10, that have become 10 texts now, would be a big priority for our presidency, not only the negotiations, and we're very happy that the Spanish presidency managed to strike this deal, but we still had some work to finalize the text, but also the next phase, which is now put into practice, what we have decided that this would be a very big priority, and it still is for our presidency. So we are now switching to the phase of these implementation discussions, and this is something we are preparing very seriously. So we are very happy that these kind of events also help to create a joint understanding about what the Pact in fact is and what it is not. I think it's very important to have these kind of discussions within our institution, but also for more general public to create a common understanding of the basis on which we will have to work during the coming weeks, months, and years. So to begin with what the Pact clearly is, it's, in all fairness, and it has been said, a very complex package. It's very nuanced. It has a lot of complexity, so it's not easy to explain, to assess what this is. And it's no secret that the fact that it's so complex is the fact that the negotiations have been very difficult and politically sensitive, and that this is the result of a political compromise where we had to take into account a lot of different interests and concerns and elements. And so the compromise is rather intricate for the moment. We are well aware. I don't think this is a problem in se. I think it's the only possible outcome that we had. But I don't think that having a very straightforward and simple system would be easy to implement, knowing the sensitivities of member states and all the stakeholders. I think that it's more the opposite. I don't think that the complexity of the system will make it impossible to put into practice. It's more thanks to the complexity of the system, we will have something that will be able to function and that all member states will buy into this system. So I think this is an important starting point. So for us, I think that the most important thing is that we have reached an end point. We standing a joint political momentum around the broad and consistent reform that will make our European asylum system more resilient and more effective, and still upholding all fundamental rights and all guarantees.
thanks again for the meeting, because I think it's important to highlight that the pact is a consistent whole of texts, and so what we often see is that all the elements of the pact are put forward and then being criticized. But I think you have to have this broad perspective to see what the pact is really about, and that indeed solidarity elements are about responsibility, and responsibility elements are about solidarity. What we should also keep in mind, I think, a bit reflecting on what we heard, is that we should avoid to assess the functioning, the future functioning of the pact on the basis of the current situation. Because indeed the pact is a game changer. It will change totally the way in which we will manage migration. So to say that the pressures will be on the same member states as we see today is a bit a different, a wrong perception of what the pact will entail. But of course, putting this into place will take time, and this is about the implementation. I will come back to it. So what the pact isn't, and it's also clear from the discussion and also clear for everyone, I think, is that it's not a panacea to all different challenges when it comes to managing migration. Indeed, the pact contains references to other elements, but still there we still have a lot of work to do. We have made big steps during last years, but still we have a lot of work to do in a lot of other policy fields, without which the pact will never work in practice. So I think we have spoken today about the external dimension, which is a focus. We have spoken about prevention, about the fight against smuggling. I think very important, and also to reply to a question we have heard, it's about return, and there are references to return in the pact, that we still have work ahead, I think, on the operational side, but also on the legislative side. And indeed, for the moment, there are no interinstitutional negotiations anymore on the return directive, because the Parliament taken a position, so we cannot engage in institutional negotiations. But for the Belgian presidency, it's very important to continue these discussions, because indeed the pact will only work with a solid return system on the operational side, but also on the legal side, and we still think there is a lot of work to do. What will happen next is also to the Commission, and the next Commission to be seen if we still work on the same basis of if something else is needed. But this is a part of the discussions we are currently already preparing in the Council, and indeed it's also about border management, it's about finances. So indeed it has to be seen in a broader framework, and we will need this broader framework beyond the pact to make the pact function. So the pact is not a panacea, nor is it an agreement that will immediately be visible in practice from one day to the next one. Indeed, we have this 2 years implementation period ahead of us, and I think that it's important to have a solid communication also on a political level, that indeed the situation will not change from day one to the other day, but that there is a common ownership indeed, and a buy-in from everyone, and that everyone, all member states, but also all institutions, take this operationalization phase very seriously, and that we have to find also solutions for short-term challenges that lie ahead of us. So this is for us, for the Belgian presidency, also the next focus we will have, to put this operationalization on the agenda. Of course, what we can do as the Belgian presidency will be limited also because we only have 3 months left, but also a presidency or the Council as an institution only has maybe a limited role in implementation, because the leading role will be at the European level for the Commission. And of course, it will be national member states that will have to implement also all these obligations. But we think it's very important, and this has been referred to, that in the Council also there we create a common ownership and also a common awareness about what this implementation and operationalization will be about. So this is why we, for the Belgian presidency, my state secretary will also host a ministerial conference at the end of the month of April, where in fact the aim is a bit also the same as what you are doing, but more looking to the operationalization. It's to create a common acknowledgement of what is ahead of us at a political level, in order to also have the confirmation of this political willingness and this political ownership and this political buy-in of ministers from the beginning of the phase of implementation that will follow the formal adoption of the pact. So this is very important, but again, it's not only to wait about the implementation to happen after 2 years, it's also about how to use this rebuild common trust, and we can testify that this is present now after these negotiations, how this can help to also improve the current situation on the basis of the current acquis. So this will be also a very important element, I think. So over the months and weeks to come, we will still organize a lot of events and discussions, also from on a very technical level. We had already technical conferences even last week on what was mentioned, convergence, about return, but then more on the reintegration and voluntary return side. So all these things that will enable the pact to happen. So we will continue the discussions together with the Commission, because as we said, indeed, it's the Commission that will have to lead us to the process, but also to confirm this common ownership and the fact that also the Council as an institution will have a role to play to keep this political momentum and to keep this political accompaniment of the whole work. So I think that indeed the exchanges today have given us again a lot of inspirations. We're now talking with member states, with a lot of member states of what comes next. We can only testify that there is a big commitment of all member states to now take this implementation phase very serious, to do what is necessary. So I can say that this is really a common understanding and common commitment for the moment, also at the political level of all member states to do what is needed. I can put it in a more plastic way, now referring to what Alexander Sorel has said. I think there is a big common appetite to start the eating of, I will not call the pact a pudding, but a whole menu, a very rich and nutritious menu. But I think we have a lot of work ahead, but we feel that there is a common willingness to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just officially close this event by thanking all of our distinguished speakers for joining us today in both panels and for sharing such invaluable insights with us in this interesting phase between adoption and as we prepare for implementation. I would also like to thank colleagues at Egmont for the wonderful cooperation. And then finally, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. The EPC will be organizing further activities around the new pact throughout the coming months, including a series of publications that will be published between later this spring on several of the files. So I would invite all of you to continue following our work. Thank you, and we hope to welcome you again here in the future.